Hello, and welcome back to Tales from the Pit. I'm your host, Michael Swaim, and this is your trigger warning. On today's episode, I'll be speaking with friend and Twitch streamer Alebrelle about adult autism, depression, and the challenges of intersectional identity, among other topics. Please enjoy our conversation and the fact that there's no new short story to skip through because I'm saving them up for a special project. So without further ado, here's Alebrelle.
Even as an autistic individual, I feel like I am relatively atypical, but I think that feeling atypical is actually the typical autistic experience. It expresses in so many different comorbidities that I don't think that there is any general experience that there is. The only core defining characteristic of autism is that it is a sensory processing disorder, and you can be overwhelmed by things in life. Sometimes that is external stimuli, sometimes it is internal. Most of the time it seems to be both for most of us, but that's not even universal. Beyond that, I have a lifelong difficulty with understanding social cues in some contexts. I'm actually very socially adept. I am what in prior eras we would have referred to as high functioning or Asperger's, but now is generally more politely referred to as low assistance need. I am pretty much able to live on my own, and I say pretty much having come to the realization just this year that I probably am not capable of living alone entirely. And that's really terrifying and frustrating given the way that we approach adulthood in America.
Right. What's the missing link there that makes it difficult for you to live fully independently?
Primarily executive dysfunction. Mine is, like anybody that deals with ADHD or depression or anything, just that horrifying disconnect with, I know I'm fully capable of performing this action, but yet there's this invisible wall preventing me from doing so. And there are enough things. Here's a disgusting fact about me. I've showered
Here we go.
once this year.
Okay.
And the only reason that shower occurred was because I had a friend over. We were drinking. I vomited on myself, and they helped me shower.
And you're like, that requires a shower.
Yes,
at this
absolutely.
Point. Yeah.
But I've been single as of the early portion of this year, and that's definitely not helping my depression. And it's to me primarily a social thing. I don't have a social life outside of a digital one, so my physical, milieu doesn't really factor into other people's experience.
That's sort of true of all of us during quarantine.
Right.
And I will say I am having symptoms of whatever I have, which I am still not sure what I have, but I have some kind of mood swing disorder that expresses at different times in my life fairly extremely. But I don't know. I'm still on the journey of trying to figure out what the fuck is wrong with me.
Yeah.
But I'm having the resurgence of symptoms that I haven't had since I was like 9, 10, 11 years old and got over in my teens. So I do think everyone is experiencing the worst of their symptoms right now. And it drives home how much just physically being in each other's presence is crucial to the human animal. What was shocking to me, or I guess very unfortunate for me, was I took a job in a completely different city, uprooted my life, and moved because I thought it would be healthy for me, rather than working entirely digitally, to be in a space breathing other people's air, so to speak. That immediately became outlawed, and everyone was excited when they were told, go home and work flexible hours, do whatever you want. That's what we can do now because we're a digital company. And I'll be honest, I fear for the future of humanity. I understand the benefits of switching to everyone works from home now, but I don't, I kind of, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, whether you agree or not, but I just feel like that's asking for an isolated society, and I don't really think that's healthy.
Right. Well, and in America, we were already really bad about that to begin with. So, no, I agree with you entirely. I feel like I'm absolutely missing the base level of Maslow's hierarchy right now, and it's very taxing.
You're over. You're overestimating me, sir. Explain that hierarchy,
Oh,
please. Pretend I'm a dummy.
I do not know it off the top of my head, so give me 1 second to throw
Sure.
some Google in here.
What is it as a concept?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs is it's
Needs,
like
I
a
see.
food pyramid for what humanity requires for total sustenance.
Oh, does so the base is like shelter, food, water,
Yes.
sunshine,
Yeah,
etc. We're plants.
yes. The lowest level is physiological needs. Second is safety. Third tier is love and belonging. Esteem after that, and then self-actualization is the capstone. And those all go into further
Yeah.
detail, of course, but physiological, obviously, housing, food, etc.
Right.
Safety, let me actually
Do
go
you
through
feel
to
you
one of
have
these.
relative safety?
Uh,
What were you saying? You think you're on? I think I'm on the third tier. Where
uh,
are you at?
at this exact moment, I have the first two tiers, but that is about to collapse for me in the next month or two, due to housing
Now is
instability.
right. Are you in a situation where you will have to give up your independence and live with a second person, or are you unsure of where you'll live? Period.
Well, here's a terrifying element for me. I don't think I'm capable of living with a random other individual. I am
Right.
only capable of living with people who have a pretty good understanding of who and what I am and are willing to do the work necessary to live with me because of that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that's not great for me.
So it's not like you can go on the want ads and find a roommate.
No,
Exactly.
I don't think I could. No.
Um, are there people in your life at this point that you think are likely candidates?
Not a one.
No.
That's certainly
All
that.
right.
Before I put
Yeah, I can
everything in
understand that being
motion,
very
I
scary.
exhausted those options.
Well, you've been able to maintain at some point, or at least you referenced, a romantic relationship. So, for example, if you're comfortable talking about it,
Sure.
I get the impression I don't have to caveat with you, but um, like I hyperventilate and hit myself in the head with like fists and objects when I get out of control or whatever you want to call it, a spell. What makes it difficult for you to live with? Is it the just inability to register social cues? Because we are in a void right now. We're just disembodied voices, and I feel like everything's aces. Like
Right.
we're never. I have no disconnect, and you've not misunderstood any subtext of anything I've said.
Correct. I would say for me, 90+% of the time with 80 to 90% of people, they would never know anything is disabled about me by interacting with me in normal day-to-day life. For me, my biggest problems are I sometimes don't understand the super subtle things. Like taking care of a partner in exactly the way that they need is a through line in most of my relationships that have eventually led to the degradation of them entirely. Further, one thing that is common among most autistic individuals is sensory sensitivity. For me, this takes pretty much every form: tactile, smell wise, as well as sounds. If I am not relatively isolated from all of those senses, it tends to be very fraying to my continued calmness. And the other thing that tends to be pretty universal in autistic individuals is once you reach the end of your rope, you can have a breakdown. It's characterized basically as a fit, but it's not consciously controllable. We sometimes revert into ourselves, become nonverbal, non-communicative, and in many cases, it looks very much like a toddler who doesn't have any ability to control what they're doing, screaming, throwing, any number of those things throughout
And when
life.
you're experiencing it, are you there physically? Like, are you in your body?
I am
It's like you're along for
sometimes.
the ride, or are you a completely out of body experience, so to speak?
I am an incredibly lucid individual, and I always have some portion of myself present, but it is not.
Mm.
That's not for all autistic individuals. I can, at this point in my life, I have learned to restrict the physical acting out, but the emotional acting out is still beyond my grasp. And if I have to restrict the physical and try to restrict the emotional, that can lead to me being increasingly nonverbal.
I'll tell you what resonates with me is just when, as an alcoholic, when I was at my worst, like drinking a full bottle of whiskey, throwing it up, and going out and getting another bottle of whiskey.
Ooh.
Um, that felt it felt like I blacked out. And I don't mean from drinking. It
Right.
felt like I didn't control my body. The period where I walked out of the house, walked as fast as I could to the liquor store, got another bottle, and walked home, I seemed to like come to and be like, I have another bottle. And that was really tricky to get around. It took many years, but I did end up intervening. I'm of the opinion that anything like that is like a muscle you need to exercise, and you just make slow, steady progress over excruciating years. And if you ever stop practicing, it tends to slip. So it's a never ending struggle. But I want to get to, I feel like the other side of this coin is there must be hard fought wisdom you have about navigating the universe with these unique challenges. What would you share with other autistic individuals, or not even, I mean, just people who struggle with the vagaries of life? But how have you found any sort of coping mechanisms that work for you or have helped in the past?
Um, I mean, the one that I lean on the most is having a couple of friends that I can go to and have conversations about whether or not I am reacting to a scenario correctly and understanding a scenario correctly. Those are two completely separate things, which I think
Mm-hmm.
most people who think about their own actions and behavior understand. And even when I don't understand a situation, I seem to most of the time be able to give a proper response in the moment, even if I'm not sure why I should give an exact response. But the generic response, like you just gave, is a lot of it is just practice. It's about consent and communication, asking people what they need, what they want in the moment, and then being able to produce that.
Now, is it so you spoke about not giving partners, for example, love in the way they needed it. I like love languages is a phrase that comes up often. Um, is that part of the disconnect for you? Is it difficult to place what people are hinting they want, or is it difficult to care? Do you know the difference I'm asking about? Like within your psyche, does it feel like you don't care, you can't care, or does it feel like you don't understand what they're asking or implicitly asking?
So that's a tricky question.
Okay.
Caring for an autistic individual from our internal state seems to be different from most neurotypical individuals, because most NTs tend to think of things in a very emotional way, and it's all about these deep felt emotions, whereas my care for someone is generally just as deep, but it in many ways comes out in an abstract sort of way. I care for people because I become attached to them. It's literally, Lieutenant Commander Data of the Enterprise. Like, my neural pathways have become accustomed to your presence, is my caring. You comfort me because you are part of my familiar world.
Yeah, or a part of the environment, that provides sort of a stability or an anchoring.
Right.
Data also has, tell me if the comparison falls apart, but Data, I think, also has a cerebral respect for and like appreciation of and understanding and can play in that realm. And like, I get the impression already just from the little we've spoken that you're very bright. So you seem to be able to access, I'm sorry if I feel like these questions are so ignorant
You're
to
fine.
someone who's probably spent more time with autistic people, but
I'm actually pretty new to most of it too, not to cut you off.
Oh,
but like,
sure.
I'm self-diagnosed.
But that's like a realm you can play in, right? You
But
know what I mean? The joy of the intellectual and the abstract.
Yes, absolutely.
Like.
Intellectual reasoning is generally where I was through all of my life until my early or mid-30s.
Yeah, it's taken great deal of effort to not live entirely in my head.
Right.
Which I think is part of the reason as I've aged, I've gotten chubbier and chubbier because I don't really give a shit. And it's like, and I drank a lot. Like, I don't care that I'm destroying my body because I just like to think my thoughts. Yeah.
The Greek philosophers would have a lot to say about that in both of our parts.
Yeah, such as?
Well,
let's go down that rabbit hole a little bit.
I mean, I think it was Plato. It could have been Aristotle. You know, they blend in your mind if you didn't study it formally a lot. But I think it was Plato addressing probably, is it Demosthenes, the guy that famously said Nero was in his sunlight? I obviously didn't. I forget.
Okay.
The Greek nerds out there will know who I'm talking about, but
they will. But that's already pretty credible that you're even pulling these names out.
Sure. I'll take it. I'm used to talking to people that are more educated than myself, so I end up feeling like a fool, even though I know the vague concepts. But
Demosthenes is from Final Fantasy XIV.
Oh,
so there you go.
There you go.
Demosthenes, I think, is who you mean. I think.
I'd have to look it up.
But who cares? What was the thought?
Yeah, my
That's
point
what
was
matters.
Aristotle was admonishing him because he was a little bit chunky. And they even in that time understood the mind-body connection, and they felt that to have a proper functioning mind required you to also be at peak physical fitness, which we're just finally coming back around to understanding again.
That the body is a temple, yeah.
Well, that you can't separate
the
the mind from the body. The mind-gut and the mind-body situation, for the brain to work properly, requires the body to be functioning as well as possible. And
oh my God, they've proven that. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh no, go ahead.
Just to support your point, they've proven that. Right, your gut biome, the ratio of varying bacteria in your gut affects your mood.
Right.
So everything is, we tend to think of ourselves as not just sludge, but we are just sludge, aren't we?
Yeah.
I mean, we're just everything. Like, our higher functions grow seamlessly out of our meat and juice and the electricity that crackles through them. There's nothing, I don't think, metaphysical about it. It makes sense. We're from the sludge.
Yeah.
Have you found, so being so cerebral and abstract, which I resonate with, have you found, is that what attracted you to streaming, and how rewarding / helpful? Like, would you encourage other people who have a similar lived experience as yourself to try and form an internet community, or do you think it's hollow in the end? Or, how has that journey been?
That is a broad question that actually just triggered a realization for me. So let's start there and then maybe answer the more direct question. So I've talked about this for the entirety of while I've been streaming. First of all, we skipped introductions. Hi, I'm Alebrelle. I do education online on twitch.tv about sex, autism, general streaming advice, life advice, dating advice, and I venture into gaming like all other streamers, but I'm primarily a just chatting streamer. I sit and I talk with my audience. How you doing, Michael? So I talk about this on my stream very frequently from my own life experience. My most financially successful period of life, I was selling insurance. I thought myself for a while a pretty good salesperson because I do seem to be especially adept at certain types of social behavior. But I was fooling myself because I was never able to take advantage of people. I was taught by my upbringing. I'd love to attribute this to the church, but my altruism honestly comes from the perfect humanity that 80s television taught us. We were taught to be honorable, truthful, communistic individuals by the cartoons and the children's shows that I grew up on. And, right. And I was completely born into what those stories taught us, and I've never been able to shake that even temporarily. So that perfect human of being selfless and trying to benefit others around us is generally one of my core guiding principles. So I was never a good salesperson unless I had a product that I truly believed in, and one of the financial roots of the insurance proposition is that on average, you will never get out of it what you pay into it. So it's very hard for me to advocate for it, despite it being a lifesaver for those who end up needing it. But I did, in-home sales of life insurance policies to individuals. I went to, this meeting that I had with somebody, which was at the end of a week that was 2 consecutive weeks of 70 hours of work where they were helping retrain me and getting me back out in the field to work on my own. They rejected me at the door, telling me that they did not make this meeting, which was absolutely false. I'd confirmed it with them on the phone earlier that day and made it with them, etc. So, we don't trick people into having meetings. And I get there and they go off on me, and I don't even begin to understand where they're coming from. But it's just, we're all against being sold, and that's what was coming out from them, I realize now. But I had a literal, emotional breakdown over this. I sat in my car crying for about 2 hours because of it, and I have not been able to work a full-time job since. It completely broke me for it to have happened, and it just occurred to me when you asked this question, and that stock response from me came to mind, is that was me experiencing a period of autistic burnout, which is still impacting me to this day. which was a thing that you and I, when one of the very few things that we said we wanted to talk about beforehand. Autistic burnout is when an autistic individual reaches a stress limit. Sometimes this can be incredibly temporary, depending on the social network that somebody has surrounding them. It can be temporary, it can be permanent, but it leads to a loss of learned skills. And it occurs to me, as I said, I'm being redundant now, that thing that I now carry a great deal of PTSD surrounding was probably an autistic burnout situation for me, because I can no longer choke 40 hours down without being a crying, worthless mess at the end of that week. And so that's why I'm a streamer, is because I've been jumping from gig opportunity to gig opportunity. My history of employment since insurance was I did insurance reports for homeowners insurance, which basically meant I went to people's homes, took pictures of their houses, and I snitched on them if anything was broken.
Oh boy.
Yeah, they're random reports. It's not, deliberate, but like the insurance company's interest is if your stuff is broken, you're more likely to make a claim, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
But I did that for 3 years. Then I drove Uber for 5 years. Even that began to become very stressful at about 20 hours a week. And I've been an online performer full time for 3 years, coming up a week from now. And this has been my full-time thing for 2 of those years. I transitioned from Uber to this because I can't generally work for a boss that is breathing down my neck at any time, because I need to be able to do things my own way. Otherwise, it's very stressful for me in a beyond normal stress level.
And what would you say the burnout comes from the same place that a neurotypical person would find burnout comes from, meaning stress piles on? So it's sheer stress level, essentially.
Yes, except for an autistic individual, one of the things that we learn to do through life is what's referred to as masking. Behaving in a way that is counter to our nature, but is the way you are supposed to be. Rather than incorporating that as a permanent part of our attitudes and personalities, the way that a neurotypical person does, we continue throughout our entire lives to consider that to be a false front that we put up for the benefit of other individuals. It never gets integrated. And so
you just sort of deal with it as a necessity. Yeah.
Because to be our true selves makes other people incredibly uncomfortable in some cases, so we have to pretend. And that, on top of having to do all sorts of other things, eventually shatters you if you're stressed too much. And I did a little bit of research on this earlier, because this is a pretty new concept to me and to studied psychology, actually. There's very few formal studies on this at this point.
On autistic burnout itself?
Yes. I mean, autism in general, but burnout specifically has very little study. But the burnout leads to an inability to properly mask. And in younger autistics, this can lead to becoming nonverbal all of a sudden for extended periods after having developed language skills. Eye contact is a constant autism issue. Most autistic individuals find eye contact to be the most baffling thing in existence. They either always want to be looking you in the eye, which makes most people uncomfortable, or never be looking you in the eye, which makes people uncomfortable in the exact different direction.
It does, although I think more people would fail to notice that than constant eye contact. I don't know. If I could throw a tip out, it would be if you have the choice, go no eye contact. People are more accepting of that.
Whereas I'm lucky, I cracked that one relatively early in life, and my formula for that is as soon as they break eye contact to match, and then when in your periphery you see them re-establishing, you follow suit with them. And for some reason that seems very simple to me, but other autistic people cannot duplicate it.
It's just fascinating, these subtle cues that we take for granted, because I feel that to some degree. I often, or I will occasionally think to myself consciously about how much eye contact I am or am not providing, and get in my head about it, and it will suddenly feel strange. And I, again, I'm not trying to be comparative at all, because I can never fully know what your lived experience is and vice versa, but it seems to me that it would be like feeling that all the time.
Yeah, it's very similar.
Because a lot of the time I forget about it and my eyes do whatever and I don't think about it. And you don't seem to have access to, or certain autistics don't have access to that feeling.
Right. I would say that the perfect analogy for it is the way that we autonomously breathe most of the time. But if you start thinking about it, you have to continue until something distracts you from thinking about it again, and then it goes back into that automatic, and all people are pretty familiar with that. Whereas being autistic tends to mean on most social things, you're always paying attention to your breath.
It always takes brain cells to shift, to use the gear shift. It's never automatic, so to speak.
Correct. Consciously, even.
Right.
It's we're never able to backboard it. It
sounds tiring. Sounds strange.
It is. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the point. Is it's masking, depending on how high or low support you are, can be an entire day's worth of spoons in and of itself.
I just don't want you to feel that everything is a spectrum. And I firmly believe that the line between neurotypicality and autism is certainly blurry, because it definitely resonates with me that I soak up stress all weekend, and then like every Friday night or Saturday morning, my partner points out that I'm incredibly depressive and irritable. And burnout is a very real force. I think that's what you mentioned, getting on this podcast with only 2 messages, sort of sliding into my DMs. And I think a big part of that was you mentioned burnout, and burnout is sort of the arch nemesis of my entire life. And yet I constantly invite it in. Because I have no ability to sit still in silence with my own thoughts, and I need constant distraction. But this episode's about you, not me. So let me ask this.
Well, I mean, arguably the whole series is also about you.
I mean, I indulge myself and put my own short stories at the top. So yes, bingo, it is. But
yeah,
I try to make sure the guest is imparting their wisdom, mostly for the interview portion. So you mentioned data, and I'm going to run with that because I love TNG. Data has something that I think neurotypicals apply to anyone with a diagnosed mood or personality or social disorder, which is the Pinocchio syndrome. Like, we assume Data wants to be a real boy. Do you wish you were not autistic, or does life just feel different, or would you press a button that made you not autistic anymore? Understanding and saying with the caveat, you only speak for yourself. Obviously, not the autistic community. Yeah.
No, most autistics would never think that I were speaking for them in the first place. Actually,
sure,
it's
great.
Fun fact. It's a good community to be a part of, because we are so used to bringing ourselves out of collective ideas that even inside of our own community, it tends to be understood that anything that's being discussed is not universal, because the condition itself is so atypical. I struggle with this question a lot. A lot of people on Twitter, because I'm part of. I'm more a viewer, an outside observer of autistic Twitter, but I am increasingly participating with them.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them wouldn't trade it for anything. I struggle with that. And I'm not certain why I'm different. I really love it about myself most of the time. But I would count it in any sort of category where you are a marginalized person, be it a woman, queer, person of color, etc.
Right.
So many of us, because I fall under several of those categories myself, we're sure to hit that at some point too. But some days I would absolutely trade it. I would not be the same person at all. I can't imagine how different my life would be if I were able to trade it away. But it is so core and endemic to who and what I am that it is hard to say that I could or would want to give it away, while also it being the complete bane of my existence.
It's the bane, but again, it's familiar.
Yes.
It's the devil, in
but
some ways. Well, but you said that you love it about yourself a lot of the time, or most of the time,
I do.
I think you said. So what are the positive aspects? I know that a lot of autistic folks are very bright. What else? Like, what are the upsides?
One of my favorites is attention to detail. Treating individuals as individuals. I often, very frequently, describe to people my one of my superpowers is the ability to keep track of small objects. If you set something down in my presence, I will remember where you set it down. And that, especially to ADHD individuals, tends to be the most magical thing that they could imagine ever being in somebody's brain.
For someone to say, "Where are my goddamn keys?" and you go,
Right.
"They're on that thing on the second shelf." You're like, "What?
Yeah.
Wow!" Yeah, I can imagine that being great.
It has been, I've gotten so many hugs and kisses from friends and partners because of that specific skill itself. It's great.
Make a decent spy, casing the room, plotting potential exits.
I've often considered seeing what I can do to get into spying, actually, because I'm so good at compartmentalizing my emotions, and I believe myself to be just below, pathological liar level capability, because I completely lack, and I think most autistic individuals are the same on this, but I've never read anything one way or the other. I lack shame and a lot of the similar penumbra of emotions. That's why I'm able to do the exact kind of performance that I do, where it's mostly talking about myself and my own existence. It's not a facing down the void sort of a thing. It's not a void for me in the first place.
So you could do very. You know what else strikes me? So you're talking about cerebral, attention to detail, no shame or embarrassment. Stand-up comedy, man. You would slay.
I'm certain that I would, but I know the work that is necessary to go into even putting together a
I don't even know if it's worth it to be a stand-up comedian, but you could do it.
Yes, I have always believed myself capable, but I know that to put together a reasonable, 20-minute set literally takes a year for most people. Right. And I am not willing to put that much work into practically anything, let alone something like that, because I don't care so much about the regard of my peers. So that seems to be one of the larger... Then you
can't be a stand-up comedian. Yeah, right. You have to crave it like nothing else. Yeah.
I certainly enjoy getting that feedback from individuals, but it doesn't drive my life.
Yeah, that level of the Mazak pyramid is fine. Whatever it's called.
Yeah, Maslow.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, what were we talking about? I had another one. Oh, so you must slay at Among Us, right? Are you great at those sorts of games?
I'm pretty decent. We in our circle, actually, we put a spreadsheet together. More properly, I put a spreadsheet together because there is a stats page on it. and people submitted their stats to me, and I put together a spreadsheet of the 25-ish or so of us that rotate between play. And while I am not the absolute best, I am definitely in the top quartile of our group.
Yeah, because that playing games where lying is part of it makes me feel very weird about myself. I really don't like them. And that's
One of
probably a
my
very neurotypical response.
yes,
I don't understand why. I don't want someone to accuse me of lying. It feels shameful.
yes,
Weird.
my best friend Crimson, actually, she's one of the people that I play with most often. She supremely struggles with that in the game. Actually, telling a lie is something that makes her so uncomfortable that I think she's the only person in the group that I can tell from tone of voice that she's lying, because
boy.
it changes so much.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the way that I lie in the game is different from most individuals. Most people tend to use emotionally manipulative tactics, whereas for me, it's about taking the puzzle of where and when everyone was and crafting a convincing cover story about where and when I was.
I find, and perhaps that's why I feel deep shame about it, is I spent a lot of my life lying very effectively because I was a secret alcoholic, and that goes with it. So you practice, so you get good at it. So I actually am a good liar, and the key to it is to not change your demeanor at all. Just say it as if you would say anything, and just rely internally on the confidence that you have credible deniability. The thing you said could be true. Therefore, it may as well be, and say it with that confidence that there's no way they could know it's not true. Therefore, it may as well be true, so it is. Just like that was my tactic, and it usually worked. And by work, I mean it allowed me to poison myself for many years. Yeah. But I mean, it did the thing. So sort of a different broad question just to get the energy going again. But I was almost going to ask, but this is almost too flip, because a lot of people said that retroactively. So, okay, the first autistic/Asperger's character that comes to mind for me is Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. And it occurs to me because I hear, or you mentioned that you're confident and you lack shame. And I hear you having calm, collected confidence in a lot of things. This is a slight social. I think most people would not say with confidence, yeah, I'd be good at stand-up. I just choose not to do it. Most people would be too embarrassed to say that because it sounds show-offy.
Most
but
people,
you're like,
with
yeah,
that question,
I'm sure I would be good at it. Yeah.
Yeah. If presented with that and somebody else believes it and they're neurotypical, their response is, oh, my friends tell me all the time I'd be good at that, but I don't know if I believe them.
Oh, wow.
I skipped the middleman on that.
That's an interesting observation that I think you're in a privileged position to make. Yeah, that's true. That would be what an NT would do. Is you would divest yourself of having said that because that seems ego-driven. You would say, well, yeah, people tell me I'm funny.
Yep.
That's spot on. But so it's interesting to me, the dumb cool joke question in my mind was like, did you feel seen at all by that show? But I think it leads to a real question, which is like, what do you wish NTs knew about autism, or are autistics as a group not monolithic enough to even have anything in that bucket? You know, what would be helpful for us to know? If anything.
Man.
And
I should have made more notes, first of all.
I think saying us is weird because I definitely have something going on. So I don't mean to like bifurcate reality into normal and not normal, because I actually think that's a myth. But there are people classed as autistic for some reason. They share enough qualities that we use the same word. Is there anything that would have been helpful, or it would be helpful in the future in your life? Because thousands of people could potentially hear this. You know, let's make this helpful.
Absolutely. Okay, let's start with giving the totally real answer to your relatively flippant question. Sheldon from Big Bang Theory has probably done the most harm to autistics of any fictional character to have ever existed.
I was wondering if that might be your take, but
Yes,
please
he
explain
is.
why.
He is all of the negative parts of being autistic while wrapping in a lot of neurotypical assumptions about what it must be like. He is a deeply manipulative individual. And you will find that most autistics hate that sort of thing. Most of us, this one I love about myself, and it is one of my favorite parts about being autistic. Most of us are actually obsessed with the concepts of justice and fairness. We are constantly, we're like paladins. If you remove the utter racism inherent in the paladin mythology.
Sure. Is it still a paladin if you remove that? I don't know.
That's a good question. Perhaps worth exploring in a game one day. But I have always been obsessed with fairness, and not just to myself, obviously. And I think that's where the bar becomes evident to other people, is when you're fighting for other people's recognition of fairness in treatment. And for me, that expresses itself most often in gaming, because that's probably one of my leisure time activities that I enjoy the most. But what's their fucking name? The puzzle piece people. I need to Google this real quick.
People who make puzzle pieces?
Autism Speaks.
Oh, okay.
They are a
the puzzle piece people, of course. Yes, I know the one you mean. That's their logo. Yeah.
They are an awareness, fundraising, etc., whatever entity. They do incredible harm to the autistic community.
No. Okay.
Yes, they are headed by non-autistics. They frequently do not listen to the science surrounding autism. They are primarily a advocacy group for the parents of autistic individuals who many autistics recognize are generally really bad at approaching the subject. That's going to be a thorny thing that I guarantee that we end up seeing some comments on this one about. Like, how dare you say I don't know what's best for my child?
How dare you question my parenting skills? Yeah,
right.
Of course.
But
and again, you speak for this is your opinion, so that's fine. Yeah.
But in communities that are advocating for autistic individuals, that is one of the things that comes up most often is, unless you are autistic, you generally aren't able to understand the nuance necessary to properly advocate for what we need.
Is the assumption, not the reality, is what you're saying. Right or wrong?
Wrong.
Okay.
To be able to advocate accurately, you have to live this one.
That's what okay. Yeah. We're on the same page. That
okay.
I agree. So that reminds me of the movement that we're seeing in entertainment, or the renewed movement, like as black people have often memed and joked, like welcome to the party or whatever. Racism was always here. There's just a quadrant of white people that are recently aware of it. But we are making strides, or strides might even be strong. We're chipping away at the idea of, there should be a multitude of voices behind the scenes. Representation in our storytelling is important for groups and people to feel seen. And a part of that is having the people who tell the story genuinely have a resonance with that identity. So it makes sense to me that you'd advocate for autistic folks to run the Autistic Awareness Program and Outreach Program. My question is, in your life, have you seen the idea of, I have a sneaking suspicion of what the answer is, but I want to ask anyway. Have you seen the woke movement at all move the needle? Is there more or less understanding for autistic individuals than there was, say, 20 years ago in your experience? Is ableism something that's getting any like redress in society, or is it being left out of this whole conversation?
I would say, insofar as mental concerns and disorders are, uh, the rising tide lifts all boats in this case. Autism is getting just as much awareness as, ADHD, depression, etc., except accepting the fact that it is less understood and less experienced by most people, and so there's a lot of misinformation-y kind of deals about it. But general mental health awareness is definitely bringing a lot more understanding about it. And I feel like, just like in the 50s and 60s, the ADHD awareness that was happening then, and us starting to understand that there was this neuroatypicality in a lot of people, we are coming to understand that now over the last decade or two. And I think in 30 years, we'll see the same level of general understanding as ADHD has today.
Well, that's good. That's helpful.
Yeah.
You mentioned, or you alluded earlier to, an intersectional identity. Let's get into that a little bit.
Sure. I am, let's throw out a lot of my adjectives here.
Here we go.
Queer, trans, left-leaning, anarchist, individual. Autistic is in there. I generally identify as polyamorous as well, but I am single at the moment, so that is an identity that is kind of fluid. But those are most of my main adjectives.
Yeah. My bingo card's full. Very well
Yeah.
played. Yeah, I don't know if that's like if a tree falls in the woods. If you are polyamorous, but you're not fucking 5 people, are you polyamorous?
I mean, almost all people in the poly community are probably really unhappy about me even having drawn that distinction. But I, my intersection with my autism here makes me a very chameleonic kind of an individual to begin. I do a lot of things to fit in properly. And while nearly every one of my past relationships has definitely been non-monogamous of one flavor or another, and I've generally regarded it as a very core tenet of most of my relationships, for the right person, I feel like I could probably give it up. But that's similar to saying that a bisexual person in a heterosexual appearing relationship does not lose their bisexual nature. Even if I were in a monogamous relationship, I feel like that is probably me choosing to remain monogamous in that relationship while likely probably retaining a poly non-mono identity internally, because I don't tend to think that love should, can, or generally even will be contained so tightly.
Okay, so I'm out of pre-planned questions, which is fine because conversation is fluid and amorphous, much like a functional polyamorous relationship. But I wanted to ask, because I know and I appreciate that you cared enough to make the effort. You did some research, you crunched some numbers, or you said you had some like facts to bring to bear or points you wanted to make. So I'll ask a question I wish interviewers always asked. Like, what have I not asked? What information should you have brought to bear in the episode that I haven't solicited yet? Let's get to it.
Sure. Well, let's back up first. One question you asked that I did have at least one more piece of information. What do I wish people knew
please.
About autism, and what does the community generally want to know? First of all, the one that comes to mind, I know I had 2 pieces, but the one that I remember is autistic children grow up to be autistic adults. It doesn't stop. It is not just a childhood thing. It's a lifelong condition. We have no treatment for it. People that attempt to treat it are generally, at this point, being considered to be doing harm to individuals, similar to, sexuality reassignment that the right-wing Christian camps try to do sometimes. Like, all you're doing is training an autistic individual to hate themselves and to mask further, which will lead to trauma and potential disastrous results in the future. Vis-a-vis, autistic individuals are one of the highest, I think, behind only trans individuals in suicide risk. I do believe 30% of autistics is the number I think I found recently, either make an attempt or have serious plans at some point in their life to be suicidal, to the trans number of 40% generally accepted. I'm in both of these categories. Those don't add together.
Sure.
I think that that's a multiplicative, but yeah, I am in a low societally supported category in multiple ways, which puts me, unfortunately. Also, I found out after one of my first major depressive episodes in high school that we also have a family history of suicide. So I've got the triple threat.
What do you think contributes to that statistic? Please speak to it from any perspective that is authentically part of your identity, but considering the topic of the episode, I would be very interested in your thoughts as a trans person, but let's go autism first, since that's what we're nominally talking about.
I think both of them are generally the same problem with society, is a lack of understanding and specialized support for those exact problems. For autism itself, it's a nearly unstudied phenomenon. We don't understand in a clinical sense how to provide for autistic individuals. All we have are advocacy groups that aren't generally listened to because for some reason we're really bad about listening to people self-advocate right now. I hope that changes sometime in the near future. But autistic burnout is one of the leading causes, it seems to be, to serious suicidal ideation in autistic individuals, because it leads to a catastrophic loss of learned skills, which in a life that was already stressful and difficult to navigate.
Right, it's such a setback, yeah.
Right. And so it's similar to I would say, physical disability, being in a car crash and losing your ability to use any of your limbs, etc. I would say that once study occurs, I will be 0% shocked to find that loss of skill is treated functionally identical to a loss of physical ability.
To the detriment of the patient, I assume. Do you think there is a possible future, like autism? It seems to me and again, I've known you for a matter of weeks, but it seems to me that I have fits. Like, I am highly I'm excelling in some regards in life or whatever. Or I'm like, I have my shit somewhat together. I have a job, I can hold it down. I have a partner, I can hold it down. I was able to punish my body with alcohol for a long time, then get over it and not have my life fully unravel. So like, I have some shit figured out, or at least I'm lucky enough to be functional. And I feel like so like, what am I not understanding about what needs to change about I guess I'm putting on you solves years of study that need to be done, but do you have an inkling about what autistics need in terms of support and structure and societal things to address the particular issues that comes when you navigate your lived experience? Like, can you speak to what should be done, what a ideal world would look like? Or are you saying there hasn't been enough study and even you don't know? Like, I don't know what would be good for me. You know what I mean? This is. Can you tell run out of prepared questions?
Entirely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, that's fine. So one of my adjectives that I used to describe myself is
Mm-hmm.
anarchist, Michael. I think you lean fairly
I
hard
do
left
indeed.
yourself, if I understand. I mean, Bold was a short-lived project on Small Beans,
Oh, there's a
but
new episode coming out in
it
a couple
definitely.
weeks. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
excellent. Good to hear it. But my answer is the same to practically everyone that leans left. Is all we need to be able to survive in the world is equalized access to healthcare, housing, and financial support that anybody struggles with. If we had guaranteed housing, guaranteed health care, and enough money to be able to take care of things, even for those of us that are high support need individuals, we'd be able to afford to bring in those carers in a temporary or permanent basis to be able to live the independent, full lives that we would want to. Uh, it's a very
No,
generic,
no.
wishy-washy kind of
People
an
need to hear
answer.
that shit
Okay.
over and over until they get it. Because speaking of Star Trek, if you added up all the resources and
Right.
divided them by the number of people there are, we would already live in a post scarcity world. There's enough for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
We just aren't dividing it evenly or fairly. There's enough for everyone. Oh my God. Yeah,
Yep.
that's the
We
fucking
can
problem with
we can
everything.
feed the world. I do believe most recent figures are 7 times over right now on our current production, but we refuse to distribute that in any way that's
Right.
equanimous
But then
in
Jeff
any way.
Bezos couldn't
In
get a high
America,
score. Like, that's what we would be giving up.
right?
It's not that, just give it up. It's not a big deal.
From from the field to our tables in America, I do believe the current figure is something like 60% of all food is completely
Mm.
wasted, and the majority of that is before it even reaches the grocery store because of any number of factors. It's capitalism is the most efficient system for deciding all outcomes is basically what I'm driving at.
Yes.
That was a
It's
little
a
sarcasm there for
brutal,
you and the kids at
unflinching.
home.
Yeah. It's efficient in the way Donald Trump is efficient. It'll run it into the ground
Mm,
efficiently. It seems, and it's big and loud, and it seems like it's working for a brief second, and then everything falls apart. That's capitalism.
yeah.
Yeah, we're in late stage capitalism. That's a very different podcast, though. That's not the purview of this show. Although, I mean, we can go off on a tear because I got 20 minutes left, and I'm at the end of my material. What? Let's at least plug your stream once again. What kind of stuff are you
Okay.
streaming lately, and where can people find you and enjoy those streams?
I have not been streaming lately. I'm on kind of an
Okay.
extended break at the moment because this is probably the first extended conversation that I've had about my feelings where I have not ended up a blubbering mess.
Okay. I'm gonna take that
So,
and run with it and dig into it. Are
sure.
is that so? And forgive my ignorance, which I say over and over and sprinkle throughout. Um, you express not feeling shame in the traditional sense, and I wonder if that's part of what goes with polyamory, because I pursued an open marriage for several years, and the inherent feelings of jealousy and recrimination, and even though I wasn't lying to my partner, it felt like I felt the same way I feel when I play Among Us and am forced to lie to my friends, even though
Sure.
I wasn't. She was in on it. It was all fine. It felt
Mm-hmm.
bad, probably because of the storytelling I've been force fed about the importance of true love and soulmates and
Right.
monogamy. But if you understand what I mean, knowing that that's a social construct doesn't mean it's not too late. It's in my bones. I was force fed it at the time when I developed my feelings about what love is. So it's in there. And
Right.
I wonder if that's part of what makes you find polyamory accessible is jealousy, or do you experience jealousy and envy?
I that was a lot
It
of questions
was.
wrapped into one, but I can yeah. Number one, I don't experience jealousy in the way that other people seem to. No. So that makes it a lot easier for me to deal with. Coupled with the fact that when I bring this up to other individuals, etc., I don't feel the shame that they try to put on me for the constructed nuclear
Right.
American family, and that not being a concern for me. Third of all, the nuclear family was constructed as a post-feudalist problem. We used to live as extended family units where we had a large degree of multi-generational housing. We all supported each other. We took care of the infirmed, and especially accelerated post-World War II in the consumerist American outcome. We completely atomized the family structure, and because everyone could afford a house for four individuals, that became the assumed norm, which was then programmed into us by the media that we were being presented at the time. And it is, on those two time frames throughout the history of humanity, still a very young conceit. And we, especially queer individuals, are getting past the need or desire for that. Chosen family has become such an important thing, even as far back as the 70s with the queer and gay crowds that existed then. Because you also asked me to shout out my stuff. Twitch.tv/Alebrelle, ALEBRELLE, also at Twitter with the same name. This is the thing I talk about on my stream a lot. I use a circus theme as my branding, and I do that very deliberately for a lot of reasons. Not the least of which is it's evocative visually, and I've always been drawn to it. But the circus was the home, much like in different time periods, for queer individuals. For those who were thrown out of their home for being deviants, for being disabled, to go to. It was your last refuge for finding a way to be able to function in society, in capitalist society specifically, and to find a chosen family. The sound that you will hear most often in my streams is the dinner scene from the movie
I
Freaks.
knew that's
Google
where
Gobble,
it was going. Yeah,
Google Gobble, one of us. It's my subscription sound. Anytime somebody chucks me a couple of dollars, that plays real quick and thanks them for their support. But I use the circus and the freak show specifically as an emblematic understanding of it being a space for chosen family, especially for queer individuals.
Awesome. Speaking of attention to detail, stepping back into that question, there was more to it, and I'm asking now in reverse order. So we talked about, I'm going back in my brain. That's right. Connect the neural pathway. Oh, yeah. So the question was, why? There's two more. All right, Swim, get your shit together. Question one. You've talked about not experiencing stage fright or like nervousness around that in that sort of arena. Does that include, you very kindly said you respect my work or artistry or what have you, but are you nervous to talk to me at all, or does that not enter into it?
Doesn't enter into it.
That's great. You don't seem nervous. I'm just wondering if you feel it. Yeah.
The comfortable confidence that you mentioned earlier is something that I feel. I was going to actually tie that to my dating life as well. I tend to be conceived, especially in Twitch. I carry a lot more recognizability than anybody else my size because of how easily I am able to talk about things, and that caught a lot of attention from one of the largest producers of Just Chatting content, currently going by Austin on Twitch. He runs the Austin Royale. He's the biggest deal there is. And they loved me because they had me on once, and I talked about, left politics, polyamory, all this stuff. And they were like, at the time, I was like 2 years ago, one of the freshest things they'd seen, and I became a regular for a long time. Depression has really curbed that this year. But I am, for my size, one of the more recognizable people on the platform, and it continues to be super bizarre to me. I peaked at 140 average viewers on my best month, and going to the TwitchCon last year, just walking through the hallway tended to produce at least one or two people that would come up to me and say they loved my stuff. And it's so weird for such a small thing to have produced that. I was recognized in the wild last year, actually. I was at a roller coaster park here, Six Flags above Chicago. I forget exactly what the name of it is. But I had a random individual in line be like, "Are you Alebrelle?"
Nice. And
it
I'm
was
sorry
so
to treat
weird.
you like you're a robot and ask what emotions you perceive, but are you able to access the thrill of that? Is that exciting to you?
In an abstract way, I understand it for how abnormal it is, but being regarded as a figure
No,
of
doesn't matter to you.
fandom and not
Okay.
so much. No, I appreciate that it gives me power in capitalist society. It gives me clout. Like it comes with this whole penumbra of things, but extremely value that it gives me a
Mhm.
platform and it gives me respectability to be able to speak about the things that I find valuable to educate other individuals on.
Right.
But the raw fame of it, I don't care about that. I care about the things that come with
Yeah, not
fame.
even fame with a capital F, but the small stakes social part of, I think, something you get to sidestep that's honestly mostly a pain in the ass is the constant sub mental tracking of tiny, really inconsequential in the grand scheme of things, nudges up and down the social hierarchy based on people making
Mhm.
social faux pas or saying something extra witty or not, or interrupting someone or saying something awkward. And getting noticed on the street for something you did is supposed to give you a little guilty thrill of like, oh, I moved up a social notch. Look at me, everyone. And it's
Right.
interesting to speak to someone who sort of sidesteps all that. So the last part of that tripartite question, uh, do you have a theory as to why you're not a blubbering mess right now? Did I not dig hard enough? Did we not talk about emotions deeply enough? No, that's a joke. But I mean, what about this experience is shaking out in such a way that you're not having any feelings of burnout, or I don't, not to say you aren't, but and you
Right.
can fall apart right now if you want. I don't care.
Sure. I know you wouldn't care. I think it and these are my speech patterns. I feel confidently actually that the difference is that our relationship right now is primarily professional, and I am speaking primarily on a detached instructional state rather than a deeply personal emotional state. Early, you heard it in my voice that I was starting to have some emotional issues, and that was when we were talking about my personal situation. But since then, we've been talking about more abstracty kind of concepts, and that's definitely the difference for me.
Okay. Well, in that case,
So, as much as you joked
yeah.
about it, it was because we didn't get too personal.
In that case, well, see, I think you underestimate, for reasons I understand now that we've had this very illuminating talk, that for most people I have on the show who have different issues, but not this particular issue, their situation, people are very sensitive, is what I mean. I like asking people questions
Mm-hmm.
around these topics. They feel like these questions are extremely personal. They feel feelings of
Oh,
shame
see.
discussing the things that we're talking about, and that's mainly the goal of this show, is to normalize, and talking about deep feelings. And it's interesting that you're someone who's like, I don't even feel like we got that deep. This is stuff that most people would be very
Right.
embarrassed to talk about. Yeah.
Okay. See, there's a blind spot for me because I didn't recognize that in the least. Now that you pointed out, I'm like, okay, yeah, probably correct. But it didn't occur to me until you said that this conversation has been deeply personal on
It's
the normal
ranged, but on the
scale.
normal scale, there have been moments.
Yeah.
But I'd like to get a little more personal, so I'm going to thank you and wrap it up because I want to at least chat for the last
Sure.
10 minutes. So thank you, Alebrelle, for being on Tales from the Pit. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Michael.